Welcome back on Peacemaker 360. My name is Christian Chito, your host, and today in the studio I am with Karen Scalbo, and she comes with an experience in peacebuilding field. She has a bachelor's degree in international development and has worked with refugee youth in the US, and also has worked in 2012, moved to Myanmar, where she took a fellowship with the IRC and volunteered with Peacebuilding and Adult Education Initiative in Myanmar, and has also finished by training programs for civil society activists from Myanmar. Today we are very glad to have you, Karen. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you today, and maybe to get started our conversation today, maybe can you tell us what has it been like your trigger point, your motivation point into the field of peace building?
That's interesting. I'm really not sure exactly where it began. I think that I grew up in a household that was very curious about the world around. So my family, they read a lot. They like learning a lot about different places. They enjoy traveling and things. So I actually think it started most from being really curious about all different parts of the world. So I grew up in outside of Chicago, but then in high school I started taking courses on different parts of the world, and quickly I realized that what I had assumed was one way to live was actually just one way to live is what I had been taught, but that there are a million different other ways out there. So I started to learn more and more and just became really interested in all different things. And then from that, I think that I started to learn more and more about sort of global systems of oppression and structural violence and inequality in all different places, including my hometown, the US at large, and then other countries around the world. And I think from that, it's really what made me decide to study international development studies at McGill University.
You come indeed with international development background at McGill University, but you also say that you've grown in Chicago, and we know that Chicago has been a city that has been very much on the radar of many news agencies here in the US because of police brutality. Right. And maybe tell us more about your experience with that. Do you think that there's much already happening to resolve some of these tendencies of violence that is caused by the police?
Yeah, I think that it's a very, very sad case, and I feel it really does hit very close to home. I think that when I went to study international development studies and in my time in Myanmar, I was sometimes very focused on the problems elsewhere and not always so self-reflective and really thinking about my childhood and the systems of racism that I grew up at, were around me in my childhood and that I grew up seeing. So now being back in the US and specifically studying peace studies and really learning more and more about how to, build peace and reduce violence, but on top of that to dismantle structural racism and other forms of prejudice, it really does make me think a lot more about what's going on in Chicago. And no, I do not think enough is being done. I think that I'm very proud of so many people in my hometown that are really protesting and really speaking up, but it seems that the administration, unfortunately, they're not moving quickly enough to really answer people's calls for justice.
It's so very sad indeed, because many of the news that we've been listening to recently have, talked about how African American kids are being brutalized by the police. And remember, recently there's been a protest regarding a video that was released by the police on a case of shooting that was done previously. So the question for me again remains, what can be done? What do you think are some of the things that should be done now that you know that not much has been done? What do you think can be done to address some of these structural challenges of racism?
Yeah, so I'm really still a student in this area, so I'm still learning about it, but I am actively learning about it because I do care very much. But one thing is definitely for people to be removed from power within the police force, within the mayor's office, other administrative offices that willingly hid information, intentionally misled the public by hiding things. I think that's definitely definitely a first step, accountability to gain the trust of the public back. And then, I'm by no means an expert on policing, but the more and more I read about the idea of community policing and sort of the safety and the positive effects on community that having policies where police officers are seen as protectors, as friends to the community, where you are able to approach them no matter who you are and your background, and to be able to rely on them in times when things are going wrong or injustices have been, you've been harmed in some way. So I think that from the more I read about community policing and the difference between that and the way the police system is now, which is very much sort of, we have all the power and might, and you have to prove that you are not the enemy instead of being protectors of the citizens. I think that community policing is
very effective.
Yeah.
Indeed, I think you've raised two great solutions or great approaches that can help in resolving some of these crimes that happen within many cities, not just here in the States, but also in many places around the world where the police has used violence to try to address some of these injustices. But I also think you've talked about accountability and community policing. Do you think, have you seen this kind of model working somewhere else, or do you have any example of how it's been used somewhere else to bring people to trust more and more the police and to see them as law enforcers, but not as enemies? How is it something that you've seen somewhere else?
To be honest, I mean, I've never personally seen it myself. No. I've been reading about it and hearing that it's effective, but I haven't seen it myself.
But let's try to move a little bit forward into another question, because I think you've talked also, and I've read some of your work in Myanmar. You've worked with the IRC, where you volunteered for it's in 2012. You worked with them on a fellowship, and I'm wondering, when working with Peacebuilding and Adult Education Initiative, how was it like for you as an American citizen in the Myanmar context? Did you feel intimidated, or did you feel welcome and received as an outsider into their world?
Well, I definitely, I lived there for 3 years, and I think right away, as soon as I got there, I felt very welcomed, absolutely. I think that it was, it's a country that was closed off for many, many decades. For almost 60 years, they've had civil war and long periods of dictatorship. So I think it's been a country that's been really closed off, and not a lot of people have been able to visit and spend time there. So, my reception was very, very warm, maybe even warmer than it should have been. But yeah, it was amazing the way people welcomed me, and especially my first year there, I was teaching social sciences at a school run by a local NGO. So it's a school for young, promising students from different ethnic minority and religious minority backgrounds from a lot of the border states in the country to come on scholarship to the main city, the largest city, Yangon, for a year to study social sciences, community development, all those types of things. So I think being a teacher, especially the position of teacher, is so highly regarded in the culture in Myanmar. So I think that that would always provided me with like a real great entryway to get to know people and be welcomed into their homes and meet their families and things like that.
So interesting indeed. I am very fascinated about your welcoming, because many times when you see international office or staff people who are working for different organizations going to a new country, many times they face a backlash because they don't know where to start from, they don't know how to approach some of these cultural practices or cultural sensitivities. How has it been like for you navigating that?
Yeah.
Or did you feel like you stepped on some people's toes without knowing, and how did you deal with that?
I think Myanmar is a very different context than a lot of other countries. So I think that the context there is so different that the backlash hasn't quite maybe happened to the full extent yet that it has in other places that have had INGOs and other bodies working like that for so long. So Myanmar was closed off for a very long time. So INGOs really haven't been able to work there, except after Nargis happened, which was in 2009, I believe. So it's really a new phenomenon. And I think that because of the diaspora, all of the Myanmar refugees that have fled across the border to neighboring countries and then also been resettled around the world, I think that through them getting their voices out, because of that, many governments around the world have been defending the rights of these of the people in Myanmar against the dictatorship, against the military government. So I think that for many people within Myanmar, they still view the international community to some extent as a community that cares about their freedom and their liberty.
Very fascinating indeed. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. But now you're taking your Master's in International Peace Studies here at the Kroc Institute. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of curious to know, what are some of the issues that you carry at heart as you think of moving forward as a peace builder? What are some of the issues where you'd like to get involved with?
Yeah. So I think that what's really important to me right now is all the different ways that we carry prejudice and stereotypes around with us as individuals, and the way that maybe the way a community is structured, it sort of reinforces those stereotypes and pushes people apart and really provides a space where misunderstanding and even then resentment and even then hatred and maybe resulting in violence can occur. And so I think for me, the reason why I'm focusing especially on conflict transformation is because after working with refugee youth in the US and then working with so many promising young adults in Myanmar who have such a vision for and a hope for the future of their country, I can see the way that these hopes for a brighter future can be paired with programming that brings together people from different backgrounds that maybe have had historically had issues with each other in the past, whether it's identity issues based on religion or based on ethnicity, based on race, based on gender, any number of these things. I think that there is a call now for a space to be created where these kinds of diverse communities can be brought together and really forge friendship and gain understanding of each other, and through that make a plan on how to move forward.
It's a very interesting analysis, and I think you've mentioned very good points that are actually very interesting to look back at, how prejudice and stereotype that we have so many times regarding the other can be very destructive, and even how the society reinforces the prejudices and stereotype that many people have against one another. But I'm interested also in your approach to addressing this problem, whereby you are thinking of spaces that can be created of engagement. What do you have in mind by meaning spaces? Do you mean schools? What do you mean by that? What are those spaces?
Yeah, so I think I'm still exploring that as well, which is why I'm here at the Kroc Institute. But for me, I think schools, I think that's where I'm becoming really fascinated, is education. But on top of that, I'm really interested also in sort of alternative education spaces. So for example, like a community center for maybe young adults. Maybe they're past the age, they finished their schooling, but there's still more to learn. Maybe there's things that they wanted to learn about in school that they were unable to. Maybe they found a new passion for what they want to learn certain skills on how to improve things in their community and things like that. And I think that programs like that develop leadership skills and self-confidence and understanding of the world around them, I think that those can be really amazing places to also pair that with conflict transformation practices. So bringing together youth from different backgrounds and trying to break down stereotypes.
Very good. Karen, one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, indeed, when I hear that you've been in Myanmar, is have you been able to pick their language? Because many times, as international experts, we come into spaces and it's unfortunate to see that many people don't even learn the language.
Yeah.
So what are some of, did you cross that barrier? And if you've learned something in their local language, what is one proverb that you can share regarding peace that is commonly shared in Myanmar? Anything that relates to peace, what do they say about that?
About peace?
Yes.
So I studied Burmese all 3 years that I was there.
Yes.
Unfortunately, I feel that in the US growing up, learning other languages, and this is really to the detriment of many young children in the US, languages isn't really emphasized as an important thing to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that when you grow up learning multiple languages, it's really good for your brain. I mean, there's lots of studies that show that. And I think learning other languages then becomes easier and easier. So I studied Burmese all 3 years I was there, and I practiced whenever I could. But I would say that my Burmese level is just at an intermediate level, unfortunately. Yeah.
But what one word, what do they say peace is in Burmese?
Well, the word for peace is nying. And I know that especially because I volunteered with a organization called Nying Foundation, which was the Peace Foundation.
Interesting.
But what do they say about peace? I don't know.
All right, no worries.
I mean, we talked about peace in English, but I don't have a beautiful proverb on it.
But thinking of your next steps, you've talked about how you are interested in working at the intersection where we can break the prejudices and stereotypes and trying to create spaces where dialogue actually happens. And I'm interested in your reflection back into your experience in Myanmar. Did you feel that space existed when you're working there, or did you feel like it's still a gap?
Of bringing together people from different backgrounds, sort of that. Unfortunately, it definitely is a gap, and I think that polarization in certain ways, especially religious divisions, have really been increasing in Myanmar. So one big issue is that ethnic minority groups are often very geographically isolated from each other. So the big cities, they are very diverse in terms of ethnic groups, and I think that has been a way for friendships to be built across those types of lines. And I think that with the ceasefires happening, and hopefully with the new government, there will be a chance for long, deep-seated ethnic tensions to be able to come to a place where it's comfortable to discuss them openly and to really work on repairing some of the harm that's been done by the Burmese majority military government and security forces. And then in terms of religion, unfortunately, one trend that's been happening in Myanmar is this sort of rise of extremist Buddhist nationalism, and that's really been sort of minimizing the space where interreligious dialogue is possible, because there are significant minority populations of Christian residents, Muslim, Hindu, animist, so there does need to be more of a space for interreligious dialogue to happen. But there are amazing people from Myanmar that are Buddhists as well, that are saying that this is not the right way, and they are holding forums, for example, bringing together religious leaders from all of these different groups and having them meet and talk publicly, which I think is really encouraging, and I hope that it continues.
Thank you very much for sharing with us today, Karen. We are running short of time, but before we leave the studio, I'm interested in one thing that I always ask some of my guests today is, when you think about peace building and when you think of your identity as a peace builder, what is one word that kind of encapsulates all of that? What would you want to see as yourself as a peace builder? Is there any word that connects with you most, that when you think about peace building, you can say this is what it means for me?
Ooh, that's hard. I mean, there's so many words spring to mind, but I think one thing that is always going to be important for me in my peace building practice is mindfulness. And for that means that thinking about where I am in this moment, my present surroundings at this time. So even though maybe I was living in Myanmar and I grew to care so much for my friends and students there and grew very passionate about the issues there, now that I'm here at the Kroc Institute, I'm not just a student, I'm still a human of this world. And so in thinking about mindfulness, it's sort of thinking about where is the peace that's around me right now, and where is the absence of peace, and how can I what actions can I take, every day in my day-to-day life that builds even just small moments of peace.
Small moments of peace. Thank you very much, Karen, for sharing such powerful and insightful, fascinating life journey as a peace builder. And we've learned a lot from you. And for some of our viewers who are actually watching and listening to us talking today, who would like to get in touch with you and try to maybe grapple together with these questions of prejudice and injustice and trying to break down some of these stereotypes that have been built against the other. Is there any way they can reach out to you? If there is any way people can connect with you?
Yeah, sure, of course. I'm always open to discussing these types of issues with anyone, so I would love that. I can give my contact information.
Go for it.
Well, my last name is hard to spell, but you can reach me at karenjscarspo@gmail.com.
That is it. Thank you very much for tuning in. That was Karen, and we look forward to hearing your conversation going on with her. And thank you again for taking your time for listening to this discussion today. It was a great pleasure to have you, Karen.
Thank you so
very
much.
Take care.